Well, I see words like doomsday, urgent, fiscal cliff. How bad is this?
That this is a very real reality that we could face. The information that you have presents scenarios that will be real should the legislature, not work with us on coming up with a funding solution. It's important that people understand what's at risk. And that's what this information is really intended to do, for people to understand that if we aren't successful with our partners at the state legislature on filling the shortfall or the gap of 771 million at a bare minimum, if we're not successful in identifying that funding, then these kinds of service cuts and fare increases, these kinds of scenarios will be our reality in 2026.
What happened? How did this
Happen?
whole, yeah, how did we get to a $771 million hole?
Well, I mean, if we really go back, step back from the current situation, I mean, the transit system for our region has been chronically underfunded for decades. The more immediate outlook in the situation we're facing is this was coming anyway, but then we had a COVID pandemic, and the federal government provided us and transit systems across the country with an unprecedented amount of money that really was able to keep everybody afloat. We in our region have been, I would say, very good stewards of that money. Our peers around the country have run out of money before us. We're facing this shortfall in 26. But when that money runs out, we are going to face this funding deficit and this funding gap. That's why we are talking with our partners in the state legislature about how can we find additional revenues to support the transit system that both people, expect and rely on a day-to-day basis. The 771 is just the shortfall in the operating, the deficit that we'll face in 2026. But there's been a lot of work done in the region to talk about actually, should we be investing more in the transit system to actually look to enhance and expand the system to get everybody to sort of the system that they want, that can provide even more growth and expansion and a better support for our region's economy.
Ask you to put it into your words, Leanne, if I could, about the situation and how dire is it?
I think it's very dire. I mean, we have to have funding certainty by May. Our calendar, because our fiscal year runs into a calendar year. And by 2026 is when we run out of those monies. And if we are by statute required to have a balanced budget, so if we don't have revenues identified, we actually have to start planning, even more detailed planning than being presented here, to affect certain service cuts and fare increases across the entire region. And it will be devastating. I mean, I think that's the point we're trying to make, is raise people's awareness of what really is at stake should we not find a funding solution.
What is at stake in a nutshell?
Yeah, I mean, a lot. I mean, we have got a 20% shortfall in our budget, but that ultimately translates into about a 40% cut in service across the region. So some of the examples of what those scenarios might look like. CTA is going to be facing the elimination of service across, could be, all of their 8 service lines across the region. The CTA, which has one of the largest bus networks in the country, it would have to be scaled down to sort of the size of sort of like a mid-tier city. Metra, for example, who provides commuter services across the entire region, we're going to have to eliminate all early morning and evening services. They're going to have to also scale back the midday services that they provide. So where the 3 operators have been going in terms of the past couple of years, where we've been seeing double-digit ridership growth, service expansion, improvements, more service running, we're going to have to go in the complete opposite direction. Pace would eliminate all weekend service and evening services, and then not to sort of to add sort of even more challenges to the region, that ends up having an impact on the ADA paratransit services across the entire region, and that would have to be shrunk by about 66%. So anybody who has a disability in our region who relies on public transportation is ultimately going to basically have no reliable form of public transportation.
I mean, I mean, I don't need to tell you, this is dire. You just laid out the potential cuts we may see, but in your own words, what kind of an impact could this have on transportation in and around Chicago?
It's going to have a huge impact on both the users and the riders of the transit system, it's going to have all these ripple effects across employers and business owners. They're not going to be able to get their employees to work in a meaningful way. That has ripple effects across, the highway congestion. If people have the ability to drive and they jump in a car, the million, rides a day are going to be, many of those are going to end up on the highway. So even if you never get on a bus or a train and don't ride the transit system, you're going to be meaningfully impacted because there's going to be increased traffic congestion, unreliability of the roadway network, not to mention sort of beyond the congestion, but the air quality impacts. I mean, it really starts to impact, jobs across the region, not just the jobs that are in the transit system, that the transit operators, but, employers and employees across the region who won't be able to get to and from their jobs in a meaningful way, or can't take a certain job because they won't be able to find a way to get to that employment. So these ripple effects really start to have impacts across the region.
When you heard about the potential options to meet this budget goal, what did you think personally about the magnitude of what you were hearing?
Well, because I'm in the business and the industry, I mean, it's not, we knew that they were going to be devastating. And and this is why we want to start laying out a little more specifics around what, just by saying a 40% cut in service doesn't necessarily translate to people that well. So trying to give more examples of what those scenarios would look like so people truly understand what's at risk. Because ultimately we have a funding crisis here and we're trying to find a solution to that funding crisis so we don't have to have this outcome, so that riders, taxpayers, and just the public at large understand what's at risk here, what's at stake, can engage with their legislators and really start talking about finding a solution for our financial situation.
This is beyond a red flag. I mean, this is almost a surrender flag if this doesn't go
Well,
through.
I
Is that
don't
what
want
you're
to
saying?
say it's a surrender flag. I think it's a call to action and helping people understand really what is at stake, because the future does not have to look like this. If we continue to work with our state legislature and we collectively look to find funding solutions, this does not have to be the outcome. In fact, what we're going to be talking about with our board next week is sort of the other side of that coin. Should we identify those funding solutions? Should we be able, if we're able to find those monies, what could the future look like? And it could actually be going in the other direction. If we're successful in not just filling the gap, but finding additional funding sources, that we could actually grow and enhance the service across the region and add more service, provide more frequency, so we get to a safer, better, reliable transit network.
Surely you've taken this message to lawmakers. What's their response been? Are you nervous that this money isn't going to come through?
Well, I think we've had some good conversations with Springfield and we continue to have that dialogue. They are very much aware of the issue and the challenges that we're all facing. I think our next step is to kind of continue that discussion and collectively across our region come to some consensus with our state legislature about what those solutions might look like so we don't have to face these devastating cuts.
I want to ask this as respectfully as I can. But for those who might think, okay, why would they release information that's really so alarming? Is they might think this is the RTA saying the sky is falling or the crying wolf here. Are you not? This is this serious.
This is serious. I mean, if we statutorily are obligated to have a balanced budget. So there's no way, there's only so much money available and you can only pay for so much service and those two things have to match up. So if we're not successful, these are the examples of the kinds of scenarios that will play out. The three operators have to do a lot more detailed analysis, and not to get too weedy, but they have to do a lot more detailed analysis that's federally prescribed in terms of sort of the details of the actual service planning, route by route, things like that. They have to also do equity analysis across the region. All of that, with said, that's going to play out over the summer if we don't find funding sources to fill the gap. But I think our hope is that Not that we're crying wolf, but our hope is that we find that funding solution and that we are actually able to fill that hole and or hopefully find more monies so we don't have to affect those changes. I mean, the other sort of perspective is if we weren't sort of raising these points now, and we got to not having enough money, people might say the alternative, why didn't you tell us that this was coming? And so we're taking it as very serious, and we recognize that these concepts, these scenarios would be devastating to the region. But you know, this is unprecedented times. We've never had a scenario where all three service boards are going to run out of money, you know, at the same time. Historically, you know, CTA had had some doomsday scenarios in the past, and we were successfully able to work with our state legislature to identify those funding solutions. And so we are hopeful that we can do the same thing again.
Have you sort of sent a test balloon up yet with other people around? I'm guessing that when people hear the potential of these cuts and see just how crippling it could potentially be, you're going to get a lot of attention.
Yeah, I think, you know, there's people that we've been obviously talking with over really the better part of a year. And really the work that we have been doing is sort of the analysis and planning to build both to this point and beyond. And so it's something that keeps sort of, it's sort of an accumulative base of knowledge, if you will, and more specificity coming as we go through this work. So, you know, I think, you know, our legislature is very much, legislative leaders are very much aware of the challenges, the funding shortfall, and what the impacts will look like. Obviously, we've been working with the three service boards, and, you know, we need this message to be out there so people do begin to understand what's at risk.
This is more than trimming. This is more than some cutbacks, right? I mean, this
Correct.
is.
There's no amount of sort of trimming or even fare increases that can fill this gap. I mean, we've been kept afloat for the last several years because of the, you know, billions of dollars of COVID relief monies that have been sort of pumped into the transit system, and that's running out. You know, New York is ahead of us. They ran out of money last year. Philadelphia ran out sort of last year as well. They're sort of a little bit ahead of the curve on us in terms of how they're dealing with this. Some of them have got some temporary solutions. Some of them have got some longer term funding solutions. Minneapolis, Minnesota has actually their legislature has acted to sort of create a permanent solution for them. So there's examples of what we've done, what's been done around the region. I do, though, want to highlight that as part of this work that we've been doing, all four agencies are putting forward proposals that would represent $100 million annually in sort of additional revenues / savings that we're putting on the table in terms of better efficiencies amongst ourselves, cost cutting, those kinds of things, as well as a potential future fare increase that would realize about $100 million each year. So we're coming to the table with pieces to sort of, you know, to help fill the hole, but there's no amount of sort of just trimming or cutting or even fare increases that can fill this kind of a gap. It's a structural funding challenge that we're facing, and so it has to be dealt with on a broader basis.
I'm not saying this was your motivation, Leanne, but it seems like when this news hits, it's going to put an awful lot of pressure on lawmakers.
Well, I think, you know, they're aware of the timeline. We know we have to have some answers by, you know, May. And so we are making sure both the legislature as a whole, as well as the public, understand the risks and the situation, the dire nature of this situation.
Glass half full, glass half empty. Where would you say you are right now optimistically about this being resolved in a way that doesn't require 40% cuts?
Well, I'm cautiously optimistic. I think that I've been around in the transit space and the transportation space a little while. So I've sort of seen some of these smaller case scenarios play out before. But I think people ultimately recognize the role, the benefits of the public transportation system that I think a lot of us take for granted on a day-to-day basis. It's sort of just there. And so really our hope is that sort of this broader messaging around both the potential cuts and the impacts, but then those ripple effects that could occur if those kinds of cuts happen, people will understand the challenges and what's at stake.
How hard would it be for you to cut 8 CTA train lines, basically? It'd be shut down, right? I mean, how do you determine which ones those would be? How do you
But
figure
that's-
out what you have to cut?
Yeah, I mean, that's the very weedy, specific kind of equity and funding analysis that has to happen over the summer months. And that's that, but again, no good outcome in any of that. I mean, the impacts would be quite devastating. And it's sort of, and we've talked about this broadly before, we create this kind of downward spiral. Like even if you cut service, you create sort of a less reliable system, if you will. You increase fares, less people want to pay, but then that means less people are riding, so you're generating less revenue, and you create this downward sort of death spiral that continues to sort of exacerbate itself. And so again, these are things that we are really trying to just make sure people understand that these are the consequences if we don't act and find a funding solution.
Never a good time to have these kind of conversations regarding the budget, but it seems like an especially rough time because things have improved, right? Since
Yes.
Since COVID and since the pandemic, things are coming back for the transit, correct?
Absolutely. We've seen double-digit ridership growth over the last 3 years across all 3 of the service operators in our region. And they've been bringing back and adding more service. And fundamentally, what our goal is and our desire would be to have the funding so we can actually continue on that trajectory and really create the transit system of the future, right? Not be talking about sort of scaling back and cutting in a devastating way, but actually planning for the future, growing the transit system, growing our region's economy, really making this a 21st century city.
Boy, well, I took the red line in today, so I love the service and appreciate it and would be devastated if any of these things, come through. It'd be
I agree.
awful.
I'm a regular commuter as well, so it's
Yeah.
it impacts me personally too.
Yeah. All right, Leanne, thanks again for the time.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.